Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Michael Bocadoro with Dairy Cares, and we're going to continue our panel discussions this afternoon. And this time we're going to turn to the policy side of the discussion. The panel is entitled Policies for Promoting Planet Smart Dairy, and we have three fantastic panelists with us today. Robert Bonney, Secretary for Farm Production and Conservation at the United States Department of Agriculture. Karen Ross, Secretary, California Department of Food and Agriculture, and Richard Corey, the Executive Officer for the California Air Resources Board. And I'm going to pick on you, Robert. You're the one I don't know, so I'm finally glad to make your acquaintance. But I wanted to start with you with a question, and that's, as Secretary Vilsack stated at COP26, there's no one-size-fits-all approach to the climate crisis and the challenges the agriculture sector faces. Please tell us a little bit about the types of solutions the USDA is supporting as dairy farmers work to reduce methane, improve water conservation and protection, and maximize the potential of manure nutrients and improve overall sustainability on their farms.
Great. Well, it's good to be with you, Michael, and good to be with everybody there. And the approach we're going to take, sort of the high-level principle, is if we're going to be successful on the climate side, we have to do things that producers, forest owners, folks in agriculture and forestry can integrate into their operations. So you're going to see approaches from us that are incentive-based, locally led, that are collaborative. We're going to look for partnerships. We're going to look for ways that we can leverage investment in the private sector. We recognize that we need to continue to advance new technologies and to drive efficiency. Even as we drive productivity gains are going to be incredibly important. We've got to think, obviously, on the climate side, just as we think about the need to feed 9+ billion people by 2050. And so, combining things, finding things that are good for agriculture, that work for agriculture, but that are also good for climate are critical. And we think, voluntary, incentive-based, collaborative approaches are the way to get that done.
Perfect. It's probably a good transition to turn to one of our regulators here in California. Richard, you and I go back a long way. We've been working on methane and other issues for a long time. And there's no question that under your leadership, the California Air Resources Board has played a leading role, not just in the states, but the world's overall strategy for methane reduction. I often like to talk about how California is leading the world in terms of we're frankly the only jurisdiction with a 40% statutory requirement to reduce methane. The rest of the world is 5 years behind us, and they're pushing on 30%. So tell us a little bit about the importance of methane reduction to California's overall climate strategy and what's been achieved to date, and maybe a little bit about where we need to go from here.
Sure, Michael, and thanks. I'd really break the response down to science, what the emission inventory tells us, as well as experience, practical applied experience. So science, with the continued emergence of additional studies and the periodic release IPCC reports, the irrefutable evidence in terms of the impact that climate change is having, and certainly on California and on the ag sector, as well as globally, really is irrefutable. And what it also tells us is that not all greenhouse gases are created equal. Methane is a particularly potent, and most of the folks patched into this know that, particularly potent climate forcer, about 80 times more potent on a 20-year time frame than CO2, over 25 on a 100-year. So what it tells us is that, one, particularly potent; two, the science in terms of the need to act; three, then we looked at the inventory. What does the inventory tell us? Because it informs relative focus in terms of mitigation. And if you look at the overall emission inventory in California, and this is similar in many areas of the country and the globe, the methane emissions represent about 9% of our total GHG emissions. And then if you break that down, we actually don't get to our 2030 or SB 32 target that requires a 40% reduction relative to basically where we are today, or carbon neutrality by 2045 or earlier, is called in the governor's executive order, without an all hands on deck strategy, basically looking at every source, every category in terms of where we can get reductions. And if I break methane down a little bit further, of that 9%, about half of our methane emissions come from dairy and livestock operations. And if you break that down, about half of it on the manure side, half of it on the enteric side. So I'm back to where can we get effective emission reductions? And from all this that I just laid out, legislation was acted on over the years, both SB 605 and SB 1383, basically recognizing the need to act on short-lived climate pollutants, and really directed us and others to develop overall plans and strategies. And that's really what has played out over the last several years of partnering, frankly, with the ag sector in terms on the manure side. How do we drive those emissions down and, frankly, do something effective and useful with emissions that were otherwise vented to the atmosphere, basically methane, get that methane into the pipeline, effectively displace diesel on the transportation side, and potentially displace geologic natural gas on the stationary side as we go forward. So to your question, we need about 9 million metric tons to get to that 40% by 2030, just by virtue of the projects that are already in play, that are either already been built. Dairy digesters are a key part of it, but not the only part. We're about halfway there. We've got about 2.5 million metric tons projected 2030. We need to build on that progress and build on that success. So I'm actually quite pleased that we've seen significant progress by virtue of partnerships, and clearly the incentive work that CDFA has done and the signal that the low carbon fuel standard sends to the market to basically value lower carbon intensity fuels that are used for transportation are also playing a role. And we can build on that experience as we're working to update the scoping plan and double down our ability to ensure that we meet our 2030 target, as well as keep us on a trajectory for carbon neutrality.
Perfect. I'm going to turn to Karen a little bit. And Karen, let me first of all just say thank you from all of us in the dairy sector that get the pleasure of working with you. You have really been central to everything that we've been able to accomplish as the dairy farm families in California. You've been central to that, and there's no question that under your direction, CDFA is leading the way with dairy methane reduction, and a lot of that progress can be associated with two programs that your agency implements: the Dairy Digester Research and Development Program and the Alternative Manure Management Program. And the question for you is, how has your agency been working with CARB and some of the other state agencies to ensure the long-term success of climate smart dairy programs and ultimately family dairy farms, California's family dairy farms, as the state leads the way?
Thanks for that, Michael. And I just I can never thank dairy families enough for their leadership and stepping up on this, because it wouldn't happen without them. And I think there's a whole combination of things, but I want to start with how important our partnership is with the California Air Resources Board. They have some of the smartest people and some of the best modelers in the world. I'm convinced of it. And Richard touched on, they are informed by science. And they also take the time with extensive stakeholder engagement to really get important baseline numbers in place. Because if you start with a bad inventory, you're going to keep making not very sound decisions. So our ability to have our scientists interact with their scientists, we bring some of that practical application to how we do some of that problem solving. But we completely respect what the California Air Resources Board has done. We also, at the very beginning of time, before we had a program and before we had SB 1383 as the first law of the land for methane reduction, we were very fortunate because of some funding that was available through the California Energy Commission. Remember, they have historically been early funders of early technology and trying to prove out concepts. And that helped make some early funding available for dairy digesters. I would say at a time where they were having a rocky start. We all have to be honest about that, how much we've all learned about that together. So we really depend on our partnerships across agencies to be able to collectively address what the real issues are, what the practical challenges are for implementation, and then for us to take another page out of our partners at the federal government, USDA, and the Natural Resource Conservation Service, which has a long history going back to when NRCS was the Soil Conservation Service, of cost sharing with farmers to adapt new practices on a continuum of conservation work. The California Air Resources Board has a long history of working with agriculture, in particular in the Central Valley, because of our poor air quality there, and measures that have been put in place to replace older, dirty burning engines became the type of incentive program that we knew would work if we gave time and cost share to farmers to be able to step up and voluntarily accelerate the turnover of their fleets and their equipment. Those all informed the two programs that we came up with. Dairy digesters have advanced so much, and I know there's new technology every day. From our early work, we knew that dairy farmers love taking care of the dairy and their animals, and they're really good at it. But when you're putting in a dairy digester at any scale at all, that's a full-time utility job. And so making sure that we could identify developers who had a successful track record, who could be another partner in all of this, was very key. They can go through the extensive application process, and they've also had to go out and help raise a lot of the matching funds that are required for dairy digesters. So we got that launched, but we also knew that for very small dairies, and especially for many of the organic dairies on the North Coast, digesters probably didn't make economic sense for them at the scale that they were looking at. And that's how we backed into the alternative manure management program, which really allows dry scrape, having that manure in its dry condition as a way of mitigating emissions and the circular economy. I mean, for 11 years now, I've been the only person at any party or forum to talk about cow poo because we call it waste, but it's a very nutrient dense product that has extremely big value. Yes, we use it to generate renewable energy, but also with our Healthy Soils program, it's the full circle of a farm and it's the full circle of a connected economy, is finding a purpose for every one of the products that the cows produce. And so the alternative manure management program has really helped people connect the dots to taking that in a different form, applying it to pastures and to row crops, and substituting synthetic fertilizer. So the numbers that Richard has quoted have been very, very meaningful of how rapidly dairy families are doing this. The state of California thus far has invested almost $300 million. We have another round of funding out for $32 million and commitments for another $48 million for next year, because we know it takes time, capital, demonstration projects to prove the case, and technical assistance. And I think we found the right formula going forward.
We would definitely agree with that. And Robert touched on, the incentive-based or voluntary producer-driven approach that the USDA is taking. That's clearly the approach that we've taken here in California. And we arrived at that after a lot of debate in the legislature. And it sounds like USDA is picking up where California picked up in terms of that approach. I'd like to hear a little bit more as to why you think that's so important. And I'm going to go to Richard with a follow-up question.
Well, I think Karen's comments touched on the importance of this. There's so much diversity in agriculture. Even if you look at dairy in California, there's so much diversity within dairy farmers themselves, much less across all of agriculture. And you start to think about forestry. And so, it means that solutions that are locally driven, where farmers, ranchers, forest owners are able to put together their own projects, able to respond to incentives, to build things that actually work for them. And on the government side, if we can value that performance, value reducing greenhouse gases, even while we continue to make sure that dairy and other producers remain productive, that's how we're gonna. That's the best approach. That's how we're gonna capture the innovation that agriculture is known for, and it's how we're gonna create opportunities out of climate change for agriculture. And again, Karen touched on that as well. How can we take what many view as a waste product and turn it into new sources of revenue, new sources of opportunity? I mean, as you all have already said, the dairy industry broadly, nationally, has been leaning into this for a long time and has taken a number of steps, whether it's dairy digesters or just looking at the life cycle of dairy farms and where we can make changes that'll improve the bottom line for those producers, even while it protects the climate. So I think clearly this is the approach that will work given the diversity of agriculture. We've got places like California that are demonstrating this will work. And so as we look at the toolbox, we want to put together a USDA. We want to learn from what you all are doing. We want to learn from what the dairy industry has been doing for well over a decade now, and build a toolbox that is reflective of that diversity in agriculture. And that, again, whether you're a forest landowner in South Carolina or a dairy producer in California, that we've built a toolbox that is responsive, that folks can integrate into their operation, and that at the end of the day, we can significantly reduce greenhouse gas emissions.
Yeah, thank you. I think we all recognize the importance of that as we go forward. Ag's diverse, and with that diversity comes different needs for different folks. But Richard, the follow-up for you, and you touched on this already a little, we've made tremendous progress. We're just a little over 5 years since the passage of 1383. We've got a little over 8 years remaining to get through 2030 and the 40% goal. We're more than halfway there, so I think it's safe to say we've made tremendous progress. And we did it against a backdrop of COVID-19 and the supply chain disruptions and the labor disruptions and just the societal disruptions associated with COVID-19. So you don't have to convince me. I know we're making tremendous progress. The incentive-based approach is working, but that incentive-based approach doesn't make everybody happy. And your agency is under constant pressure. So, in your mind, why is it important that we continue with the incentive-based approach? It's working, and how are we going to communicate that better to everyone else that this is a good approach, it's working, and frankly, it's consistent with what the rest of the country and rest of the world are doing?
Yeah, and I think pretty clear, Michael, that there's not one particular strategy here. It's a complex challenge we're facing in terms of sectors and issues, and realizing that it's going to take, to me, a range of strategies. And one of the first things that we are looking at as we're updating the scoping plan to stay on track for 2030 and meet carbon neutrality, what's already working. And I put the proof in the pudding is really what's delivering emission reductions. And the partnerships with the dairies and the ag community actually has been. It's yielding results. We actually think we can build on that and continue to build on that relationship and that outcome. In our view, when we look at these strategies, they clearly have to make sense for California. They've got to make sense in terms of the end of the day reducing emissions. You also need to make sense economically. The legislature's been very thoughtful about how there's never enough money and how those appropriations are doled out. Also is recognizing the important role that the ag sector plays. We also think about exportability, or the strategies actually that we're employing exportable to other states and either other jurisdictions. And this is an example of one where I would say the facts, I think, speak for themselves in terms of the reductions that we're seeing that are being yielded through the implementation of this program. But to your point, and it's a fair point, because I have yet to see any measure or program that fully satisfies all folks. And just to get to your question, and it was fair. It's not new to us, certainly not new to me, but there's certain principles I think are super important, and we've really tried to employ those, which are hear everyone out. I mean, there clearly are folks, and I don't know if I might as well speak a little bit to it here, that have raised concerns about dairy digesters. completely have that open conversation. I actually think that when those questions are raised, they fully get daylighted. We just had a dairy focused workshop. It was really with that objective: bring everyone to the table. That gets always better. Have an open public conversation, document the data, document information, evidence. Facts matter. They matter a lot. And I know that we don't always necessarily see eye to eye with all stakeholders, but I've never seen a downside in having open conversation and underlying documentation and evidence. I think it's super important. And I also think it's important that the relationship with communities continues to be elevated because you can run into groups that may or may not be associated with communities. Not that they shouldn't be heard or they have a full right to be heard, but direct relationship with communities that they can see projects, tours, show them what's going on. I think it's super helpful in terms of where we were and where we're moving forward. Where we were methane emissions generally vented to the atmosphere. We have an opportunity to collect it, get that gas in the pipeline, and do useful work with it, displacing, frankly, other fuels, including geologic natural gas and even diesel, depending on the replacement vehicles. So we have an opportunity here to learn from what we've applied. But I speak confidently, not that we won't make adjustments and future learnings. All of us, we learn from one another, but we have evidence and facts at the end of the day. They're yielding results here that are significant and that matter.
No, and I think we'll kind of take off from there a little bit, Karen, and bring a similar question to you. There's no question that digesters are central to our strategy here in California. I think CARB recently documented, and I know your staff has documented, that the digester program is producing about 90% of the reductions that we've been able to achieve to date on the dairy manure methane side. And clearly there's no way to achieve what the state's trying to achieve. I think the same thing is true for what USDA and US EPA are trying to achieve. Digesters are going to be critical to that. So what do we need to do in your mind to overcome some of these barriers to keeping the grant money flowing and to keeping the markets that are so critical on the back end of these projects have and continue the progress and the momentum that we've been able to build up?
I was hoping with Richard's very complete answer that you would skip it for me, Michael, because I don't have an easy answer. It's complex and especially when it comes to the communities. You know me, I want everyone to be really proud of what we're able to do in California agriculture, but at the same time, we have to own up that some of our past practices have created some of the impacts that we're living with today. But that's what the exciting part about research, technology, innovation shows us a better way of doing it. And so when Secretary Vilsack challenged me when I left USDA to become secretary, he's like, "You have the most cows and the fewest dairy digesters. What are you going to do about that?" So we established a federal state work group of every agency that would touch being able to permit a dairy digester. And it was a 2-year process to map that out, to see that some of the requirements of one agency, let's just say the Air Board, may have been contradictory to what another agency, a water board, needed to do or felt comfortable with. And so being able to work through that process so we all understood that no one was being asked to sacrifice environmental outcomes and as a way to expedite, but that we could see that some were redundant and some were conflicting, and we're able to unify the review process to really have in place a way that if you had a proposal for a dairy digester and you had the financing, you could see that there would be a pathway for getting it permitted. And I think taking the time for people who weren't as involved 11 years ago as perhaps they are today to really understand the kinds of environmental protections that we've added to be able to do this, some of the limitations that are put in place with regard to herd size because of concerns of continuing to grow and not be in environmental compliance, and to really see what the new technology is really doing, that we are taking a very powerful pollutant, this air emission methane, to turn it into a renewable energy source. And especially with regard, if every truck on I-5 and 99 was cow powered with this low carbon fuel standard, there's an immediate improvement in air quality for all the people in the valley who suffer from asthma or other respiratory issues. I want people to feel proud about that, but I also haven't walked in their shoes. And so we just have to be willing to listen to one another, to take that big leap of faith and invite people in to tour and have an exchange, share some of that good cheese, that yogurt, and especially the ice cream, whatever it might be, and listen to one another and know that we live in this shared community and we all want the best outcomes possible for our children and the jobs that are connected to this, including all those jobs in the building of this, making the connections as some of the digester folks have to supporting engineering students from CSU Bakersfield as an example with scholarships, and then taking that work all the way to a cheese plant or a processor to see the beginning to the end product, and that we're all in this together. And the one thing I know about dairy families, they're always looking for ways to improve. They would not have the record of how much they've cut their water use or reduced greenhouse gas emissions if they weren't willing to always improve their processes. Sorry for the long speech, but I just want people to really know we're all in this together and to understand each other's perspective.
Agreed. And I doubt that Robert's dying to answer that question, so I'll let him off the hook. And I'm going to turn it to a related topic. And we've talked a lot about manure methane, and that's where most of the progress has been made. But as we've heard on just about every panel today, and I'm sure we'll continue to hear about it, solutions for enteric emissions are also important, not just for the dairy sector, but for the beef cattle sector in particular. Where are we with FDA approval and the commercial availability of feed additives, and how important are these solutions, and what can we do to expedite that process as much as we can?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think your premise is absolutely right. You asked how important they are. They're clearly critically important for dairy, for other parts of livestock as well. Richard talked about how important methane is if we're going to meet targets by 2030 and 2050. And clearly feed additives are going to be really critically important. Different part of the federal government, right? FDA. We've had some good conversations with FDA, but it's clear that moving on feed additives quickly is going to be really, really important. And looking for ways that we can speed that process is critically important. As you all talked about, there's been a ton of innovation, a ton of emissions reductions in the dairy sector, obviously in California and elsewhere, but in the livestock sector as well. If you look at livestock across the globe, U.S. livestock is far more efficient than other parts of the globe, and we're both very, very productive and very efficient relative to greenhouse gases. There's far more we can do there. The types of things you all are thinking about in California, dairy digesters, manure management, all that stuff. Feed additives are obviously going to be a critical part of the set of options here, and looking for ways that we can streamline that at the federal at the level of federal government is going to be really, really important. There's more work to do there.
Yeah, without a doubt. And I know enteric's a big piece for us here in California in terms of achieving what CARB wants to achieve. It's not just the manure side, but it's the enteric side as well. And Richard, I'm going to kind of follow that up with a leadership question, because California loves to pride itself. It really is a leader on climate. It's certainly a leader, as I already mentioned, on methane in particular. And if we're going to continue that leadership role, and when Frank spoke earlier today, he was in Switzerland, and he's there giving a talk about what we're accomplishing here in California. Then he's going to Uruguay, and he and I are both going to be speaking to a group in Brazil in early May. Karen, you and I spoke to a group from Finland last week, and we've got a group visiting California right now from Denmark. And clearly people are paying attention to what CARB is accomplishing here in California, Richard. And so how important is it as we move forward to make sure we're doing things. No one will follow our lead if we're not being, one, successful, and two, doing it in a way that we're not just exporting our emissions to another state or another country or another part of the globe. So how important is that, and how do we maintain that?
No, it's the right question, and at its core, uh, ambitious targets are great, and I would say they're a starting point. They're not the ending point. At the end of the day, I don't think folks are going to partner with us, other states, jurisdictions, because we have an ambitious target that's unachievable. It's demonstrated outcomes and how to deliver on those outcomes through partnerships and through a range of policy tools. And to the point that I made earlier, historically, we've looked at a range of strategies, for instance, whether it's mobile sources or motor vehicles or carbon price. The point that I made, they certainly have to make sense in California. And the way that that makes sense to me is underlying science, strong partnerships, uh, industry, enviro, the academic community, communities, the ability to execute, the ability to monitor, report transparent data, and adjust if you don't always get everything right. You need to be able to make adjustments. I think it's that track record that people look to, because I clearly remember when AB 32 was going through the process in '06 and ultimately became law. The outrageous ambition that was called for was going to tank the economy, was going to lead to massive exodus of business from the state, and gas lines, and actually not show the reductions that the program was ultimately calling for. If you fast forward, and I would say it's predicated on those various principles that I just walked through. One size doesn't fit all. There's a range of strategies. Incentives were part of it, as well as regs and other policies. If you fast forward to today, you all know that we met that target 4 years ahead of schedule. California's economy continued to grow, I think faster than any state in the union or near it. And manufacturing in many sectors has come to California, which I think a lot of people don't realize that in terms of many of these cleaner energy sectors. So that's what I think partners look to. Demonstrated, proven evidence, not big, ambitious talk. It's basically, are we executing? And it builds partnerships, and we're clearly trying to capitalize on that.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, because I think the industry feels the same way, is that it is a partnership. I call on you often, and Karen even more often, to help sort through some of the issues within the administration amongst the agencies. I know you always help. I know you probably don't appreciate all my phone calls, because they're often. But that partnership is critical, and I guess this is a question for Robert as we move forward. Now, I don't know that you're aware, but the California dairy sector helped pass Senate Bill 1383 at the end of the day, once we got it to a point where we could feel like we could embrace it and achieve what the state was seeking to achieve. And are you getting that same level of commitment at the national level with the dairy and livestock sector that we had here in California?
Absolutely. And, I worked for Karen at the beginning of the Obama administration, and we both remember that climate change was a difficult issue across rural America, particularly in agriculture and forestry. The one group that was heavily engaged in a very forward-leaning way, as I said before, was dairy, when it was highly polarized. Um, but things have changed a lot since the early days of the Obama administration. And agriculture is in a really positive place right now. They're at the table looking for solutions, engaged. Same's true on the forestry side. Forest industry, forest landowners at the table, engaged in a conversation, looking at ways that they can advance incentives, new technologies, in a way that I think is really, really important. And it's important that we encourage partnerships, collaboration, innovation. Of course, USDA has an important role to play, but we need to play it as a partner, partnering with state of California, partnering with land grant universities. And so I'm really optimistic right now around where where agriculture and forestry are. And we've got to, we've got to continue to build a toolbox, as I said before, that works for all of agriculture and forestry, recognizing that we don't know everything. We've learned a lot from you all. There's more different types of tools that we're going to need in that toolbox, both on the resilience side and on the mitigation side. Investments in research are going to be really important. I go back to something, Richard, that you said, that facts matter. We're going to have to prove this stuff up. And there's always been some skepticism about the role of agriculture and forestry and climate, right? There are a lot of folks that come into this, it's just a fossil fuel issue. We know that's not the case, but we're going to have to prove this stuff up. And I just think where agriculture is right now, there's a real recognition of that, a recognition of the need to be at the table, and I think a recognition of the opportunities if we do it right. And so, as I say, I'm optimistic. That doesn't mean that there aren't big challenges and that we don't have substantial work in front of us, but the level of engagement, the positive engagement right now from agriculture and forestry is really, as you can tell, it makes me optimistic.
No, and I think it's good to be optimistic. It was a little bit of a blind leap for us back in 2016, but I think we've very quickly shown that we can put the grant programs in place, the markets, whether it's the LCFS or the Biomat program to purchase electricity, or the renewable natural gas program that we all worked so hard on recently to make sure we had a market for selling gas to our investor-owned utilities in California going forward. So now that we've created that momentum and we've got 16 digester hubs that are currently under various stages of development, we've gone from 10 digesters in 2016, 12 digesters maybe. When 1383 passed, it was 40 after December of 2020, 89 after December 2021. I'm guessing it's going to be in excess of 120, 130 by the end of this year. And those 16 clusters will support 200 dairy digesters, including for the first time really being able to bring some of the smaller dairies in. So I give a lot of credit to Karen, you and Richard for having the vision and helping us implement these policies. And I do think there's good opportunities for Robert to learn at the federal level and for USDA to learn. It wasn't exactly as we drew it up, that's for sure. Some of it sort of fell into our lap, and some of it we've had to fight very hard for. But thank goodness for the partnerships of Richard and Karen and others in the Newsom administration and the Brown administration before that to make some of these things happen. I want to turn for a second to a related topic, and it's another one that the livestock sector and dairy sector here in California is struggling with, and it's what happens here eventually happens across the rest of the country. So Robert, a good opportunity for you to hear a little bit about it. Karen, you recently created a manure recycling and innovative products task force that's been working hard to explore opportunities to maximize manure's role in building healthy soil. So we not only can extract the gas from it and put it to renewable use, but we can extract the fertilizer value of it as well and put it to healthy soils. Can you talk a little bit about that? And then Robert, I'd love to hear your follow-up in terms of what USDA is thinking about on the same front.
So first note that I was brilliant to foresee the situation we're in, where fertilizer prices and scarcity would make this the most meaningful task force ever. As you know, right after 1383 passed, then Air Board Chair Mary Nichols and I co-chaired a working group to really dig into how do we scale up as rapidly as possible? What do we have already that we know that works? And what do we have to park for additional research and more experience? And one of those areas was this product that we knew had nutrient value, but there weren't a lot of products there. There was interest in it, not as much research, perhaps as has happened now. So it just felt like the right time to reconvene that group and to learn more from the private sector in particular that's doing a lot of work in this, being led once again, Dairy Innovation Inc. and some of the players in that, some of the major companies who are very interested in this because of the interest in sustainability generally, but especially for food production and the companies who sell our products, helping to drive some of this conversation. So we just got that launched at the first of this year. It got off to a slow start because of COVID. I just received an interim report last week. There's still a lot more work to do, but I've really put us on a fast timeline that by the end of 2022, we have some specific recommendations. We did get a modest amount of research dollars from the legislature last year around methane, enteric fermentation. So we will have some dollars to maybe jumpstart some projects that look most promising. And I have to say, the work we're doing here on this circular economy is the first of many. This is happening at the same time that Cal Recycle, because of the need for reducing and diverting 75% of organic waste from landfills because of methane, wants to turn as much of that into compost as possible. Wouldn't it be great if we could move this product that is so nutrient rich and has had impacts on our water quality and the groundwater basins from those really rich areas to those areas that they're paying a lot of money to import synthetic fertilizer, and get to a more sustainable, balanced use of this product that's already here, that does fit into organic and sustainable farming systems. And that could replace really expensive and detrimental synthetic fertilizers and soil amendments. I mean, that's the dream. I think we can get there, but it creates a wonderful opportunity for new partnerships for research on a global basis. And Secretary Vilsack has several global initiatives going on that really focus on shared dollars for research, so we can accelerate the commercialization of products that can be successful. And I think this just has to be a part of it. So take advantage of the situation, and know that we have a lot more eyes on us now because of the scarcity and the tripling in price of fertilizer today.
Robert, would you like to chime in on where USDA is with some of the same solutions?
Yeah, and I think there are a number of potential opportunities we have at USDA. Karen mentioned the importance of research and continued efforts there to drive innovation. But on the NRCS side, making sure that we've got the practices that we can cost share that can help facilitate some of this. And how do we make sure that we're updating our practices to help drive and support some of this innovation? So I think there are opportunities there as well. And then on the rural development side, we've got opportunities to make loans and grants out of the rural development side of USDA into rural businesses, and there's enormous rural business opportunities here as well. And so there may be opportunities there. And as Karen notes, with nitrogen prices where they are, some of these may start to pencil. And I remember, when I was in the Obama administration, thinking about how we could make investments in rural development into dairy digesters and how to make them pencil. And part of it was, how do you find value for the methane? Part of it was, how do you find value for everything else? The nutrients, the dry matter, all that stuff. And we're in a place now where there's actually real opportunity. You all are starting to prove it up out there for exactly that type of those type of investments. And so I do think there's a lot of interest, and I think hopefully we can utilize some of the programs here at USDA to help support that.
Great. And Richard, I'm going to come back to you. And we've talked a lot today about market-based solutions. We've called them innovative or incentive-based solutions, but market-based solutions really, and they've really shown over the years that they can be very effective with agriculture, whether it's trading out farm equipment for newer farm equipment with some incentives from the state and from the San Joaquin Valley Air Pollution Control District. We've seen it adopted, solar been adopted on a number of dairies and hundreds of farms in California because it made economic sense. And we've seen the same thing with digesters and some of these other solutions. So what's the key in your mind to optimizing that market-based approach going forward so that we can not just apply it to the manure side, but to the enteric side as well?
Yeah, few just observations, Michael, I think that get at that question. And I just kind of think about a pathway to change, right? What are the landscape that supports change? And part of it, I think, is legislation. There's clearly legislative leadership in the climate space in California and abroad in terms of where you're trying to get to and why, and what does the underlying science tell us. I think that foundation is really important as a starting point in terms of where we're trying to get to, and what is the underlying science and support. A teamwork. And Secretary touched on the work with CDFA. I can't say enough good things about the partnership with her and her team, because you can't do things alone. This isn't the old days where we can go off and write a program. We can't effectively move forward without partnering with the industry and learning from them, working with enviro groups, working with communities, and laying out a path to actually move forward and being open to the range of tools, because there's not one tool. And the incentive tool has played a role, I think an important role. But the other part is the monitoring and the reporting and evidence and documentation, and the ability to adjust as you go along. I think all those elements are fundamental to effectively moving forward. But at the end of the day, it's results, it's outcome. And if I really think about what we're doing, the collective we, certainly incentives have a role and have had a role. But at the end of the day, it's attracting market capital that's flowing into seeing opportunities. And if I drill down a little bit more, well, what drives market funding? What drives that capital is certainty of the market, that there's a target, and we're going to stick by that target. Mm-hmm. That basically there are the expectation of return and an investment on that in a sense creates the opportunities to invest, to innovate, to actually see change. And to me, with that comes a lot of responsibility, I think, for policymakers in terms of sending clear signals, sticking by those signals, certainly adapting as information evolves over a period of time, but not zigging and zagging by the week and confusing the market and putting a wet blanket on the very investments that we need to see to actually support the kind of transformation we're seeing. I think that not only is fundamental to what the kind of change that we need and are seeing in California, I think it's fundamental to change and necessary nationally and internationally, and people pay a lot of attention to it. We want investments to flow in this space. We want investors to see opportunities. That's fundamental to ultimately getting to where we're trying to get to.
Thank you. And we're getting to the end of our time. We've got maybe a quick last opportunity for Robert and Karen to give us that, what do you see as the greatest opportunity for government to help promote planet and climate smart farm practices? Robert, why don't we go to you first? We've got about 2 minutes, I think, left in the whole thing.
I'll be quick, and I've talked about research and NRCS programs and some of the incentives. We've recently announced partnerships for climate smart commodities, where we're supporting deployment of climate smart practices, as well as the monitoring, measurement, verification that goes along with that, and seeing a lot of interest and a lot of folks in agriculture coming forward. I think we'll see a good turnout and interest in proposals that come in. And I think it gets at what Richard was talking about, which is the opportunity to build something that will attract private capital. And we'll see what comes in, but initial indications are lots of interest there, and that this may be a model that works going forward.
Karen, I think we've got a few.
Yeah, if I can just add, I feel so lucky to be on this panel with all of you. Robert Bonney is one of the smartest people you'll ever meet. And so I'm thrilled that he's our partner there at USDA. And Richard has been such a terrific partner. But I think they both have capitalized on what I wanted to point to, and that is the market itself, whether it's buying the product or making the investments. We are proving it out. And the most important thing we can do is get good, successful outcomes from the USDA proposals right now. If there's a way for us to harmonize the measurement, the verification, so we're all not faced with a flurry of many, many labels, all measuring slightly different things, that'll be best for the farmers and the longevity of these types of programs, and it will be best for consumers to really have faith and confidence that what we say we're doing is getting the results that they expect. And so I see tremendous opportunity, and it's all being helped and led by dairy farmers and California agriculture. And so we're about growing opportunities. Let's keep up the good work.
Yes, thank you all for your time and participation today. And most importantly, thank you all for your leadership. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Bye.